Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight, we journey through one of humanity's oldest and most influential civilizations, a story that spans 5,000 years, from the dawn of written history to the complex nation we know today. This is the story of Iran, the land once called Persia, where some of the world's first empires rose and fell, where poetry and science flourished while Europe slept through its dark ages, where East and West have clashed and merged for millennia. From Cyrus the Great, who freed the Jews from Babylon and wrote the first Declaration of Human Rights, to the Islamic Revolution that reshaped the Middle East, Iran's story is one of extraordinary empires, magnificent culture, devastating invasions, and a people who have maintained their identity through everything history could throw at them. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's begin this epic journey through the eternal land of Persia. Part 1. The Ancient Foundation Before Persia. The land between the mountains. To understand Iran, you must first understand its geography. Iran sits at the crossroads of three worlds: the Mediterranean to the west, Central Asia to the north and east, and the Indian Ocean to the south. It's a land defined by contrasts: snow-capped mountains surrounding vast deserts, fertile valleys bordering salt wastes, lush coastlines giving way to barren plateaus. The Iranian plateau, averaging about 4,000 feet above sea level, is ringed by mountain ranges: the Zagros Mountains to the west, separating Iran from Mesopotamia, the Elburz Mountains to the north, bordering the Caspian Sea, and the eastern highlands leading toward Afghanistan and Pakistan. This geographic position made Iran both a corridor for trade and migration, and a fortress protected by natural barriers. Two great deserts dominate the interior: the Dasht-e-Kavir, Great Salt Desert, and the Dasht-e-Lut. These harsh landscapes, virtually uninhabitable, forced Iranian civilization to develop along the Shi'a mountain valleys and coastal regions where water could be found. The Iranians became masters of water management, developing the Qanat system, underground channels that brought mountain snowmelt to settlements miles away, an innovation thousands of years old that still functions today. This challenging geography shaped Iranian character: resilient, adaptable, valuing cleverness and survival skills. The land required cooperation and sophisticated organization to thrive, creating a culture that valued strong governance and social order. The first Iranians, the Indo-European migration. Around 2000 by CE, waves of Indo-European peoples migrated from the steppes of Central Asia into the Iranian plateau. These were the ancestors of the Persians and Medes, horse-riding nomads related linguistically and culturally to the peoples who would settle India, Greece, and much of Europe. These early Iranians brought with them a language that would evolve into Old Persian and related tongues, religion centered on fire worship and nature spirits, and a warrior culture based on horsemanship and archery. They gradually settled among the existing populations, establishing a pattern that would repeat throughout Iranian history. Newcomers arriving, mixing with existing peoples, and creating new syntheses. The early Iranians divided into various tribes and confederations. Two groups would become historically dominant: the Medes, who settled in the northwest, modern Kurdistan and Azerbaijan regions, and the Persians, who settled in the southwest, the region still called Fars Province, from which Persia derives. The Median Empire, first Iranian kingdom. The Medes were the first Iranian people to establish a major state. By 700 BCE, they had organized themselves into a kingdom in northwestern Iran. Facing threats from the Assyrian Empire, the dominant Near Eastern power that had brutally conquered much of the region, the Medes built a military state capable of resistance. In 612 BCE, in alliance with the Babylonians, the Medes sacked Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, destroying the Assyrian Empire in one of ancient history's most complete military collapses. The Median Empire expanded, controlling much of western Iran and parts of Anatolia. The Medes established administrative practices, court protocols, and governance structures that the Persians would later adopt and perfect. They created a model of Iranian kingship that emphasized royal majesty, divine favor, and multi-ethnic imperial administration. Though their empire would last less than a century, the Medes provided the foundation upon which Persian greatness would be built. Zoroaster, the prophet who changed the world, sometime around 1500 to 1000 BCE, the exact date remains disputed. A prophet named Zarathustra, known to Greeks as Zoroaster, arose in eastern Iran. He preached a revolutionary religious message that would profoundly influence not only Iranian civilization, but Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as well. Zoroaster taught that the universe was a battleground between Ahura Mazda, wise lord and source of all good, and Angra Mainyu, Ahriman, the destructive spirit and source of evil. Humans had free will to choose between good, truth, order, righteousness, and evil, lies, chaos, wickedness. The righteous would be rewarded with paradise after death, the wicked punished in hell. At the end of time, good would triumph, the dead would be resurrected, and the world would be purified by fire. This dualistic theology, the cosmic struggle between good and evil, the emphasis on individual moral choice, the concepts of heaven and hell, resurrection and final judgment, would influence later Abrahamic religions profoundly. Zoroastrianism became the religion of the Persian Empire, providing moral and ideological foundation for Iranian civilization for over a millennium. Zoroastrian fire temples, where sacred flames burned perpetually, became centers of worship. The religion's priests, the magi from which we get magic and magician, maintained complex rituals and astronomical knowledge. Zoroastrianism taught that the world was fundamentally good, that pleasure wasn't sinful, and that humans had a duty to fight evil actively, to farm, to have children, to build civilization. This world-affirming theology created a culture that valued material prosperity, family, and social order. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Persian Empire. In the 6th century BCE, a prince of the Achaemenid dynasty, a noble family from the Persian heartland of Fars, began to challenge Median supremacy. His name was Cyrus, and he would become one of history's most successful and admired conquerors. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus rebelled against his Median overlord, King Astyages. According to legend, Astyages was Cyrus's grandfather, and the revolt was part family drama, part political revolution. Cyrus defeated the Median army, helped by Median nobles who defected to him, and took control of the Median Empire. But Cyrus wasn't content with just the Iranian plateau. He turned west toward Lydia, in modern Turkey, ruled by the fabulously wealthy King Croesus. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Croesus consulted the oracle at Delphi, asking if he should attack Persia. The oracle replied that if he attacked, he would destroy a great empire. Encouraged, Croesus invaded. He did indeed destroy a great empire, his own. Cyrus defeated Croesus and absorbed Lydia into the Persian Empire around 547 BCE. Then came the greatest prize, Babylon. The ancient city on the Euphrates River center of Mesopotamian civilization for millennia, had recently become independent from Assyria. But Babylonian king Nabonidus was unpopular with the powerful priesthood of Marduk, Babylon's patron god. In 539 BCE, Cyrus's army approached Babylon. The city, with its massive walls, reportedly wide enough for chariot races on top, seemed impregnable. But according to tradition, Persian engineers diverted the Euphrates River, lowering the water level enough for troops to enter the city through the riverbed gates. Babylon fell with minimal fighting. What Cyrus did next was revolutionary. Instead of sacking the city or enslaving the population, standard practice for ancient conquerors, Cyrus declared himself the legitimate king of Babylon, protector of its traditions. He restored temples, returned looted religious statues to their home cities, and presented himself as the chosen of Marduk, sent to restore proper religious observance. Most famously, Cyrus freed the Jews, who had been exiled to Babylon decades earlier by Nebuchadnezzar. He allowed them to return to Jerusalem and even provided funds to rebuild their temple. The Hebrew Bible celebrates Cyrus as God's anointed, chosen to free his people. He's the only non-Jew in the Bible given the title Messiah. The Cyrus Cylinder, a clay cylinder inscribed in Babylonian cuneiform, records Cyrus's actions and principles. Some historians call it the world's first declaration of human rights. It proclaims religious tolerance, condemns oppression, and asserts that conquest should improve subjects' lives, not just extract wealth. Whether Cyrus was genuinely idealistic or brilliantly pragmatic, making conquered peoples grateful rather than resentful, his policies created a model of empire different from the brutal Assyrian precedent. By his death around 530 BCE, Cyrus controlled an empire stretching from the Mediterranean to Central Asia, from Egypt's borders to the Indus Valley, the largest empire the world had yet seen. His tomb at Pasargadae, in his homeland of Fars, stands even today. A simple stepped monument with the inscription, "I am Cyrus, who founded the empire of the Persians. Grudge me not this monument." Alexander the Great, when he conquered Persia 2 centuries later, visited the tomb and ordered it protected and restored. Even Persia's conqueror recognized Cyrus's greatness. Part 2. The Achaemenid Empire, the first superpower. Cambyses II, the conquest of Egypt. Cyrus's son, Cambyses II, inherited the empire and immediately turned toward the one remaining great power in the region, Egypt. The Egyptian pharaohs ruled the Nile Valley, one of the ancient world's wealthiest and most sophisticated civilizations. In 525 BCE, Cambyses invaded Egypt. At the Battle of Pelusium, Persian forces defeated the Egyptian army. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, the Persians used an unusual tactic. They drove cats and other animals sacred to the Egyptians before their forces, knowing Egyptians wouldn't shoot arrows that might harm sacred creatures. Whether this story is true or not, the Persians won decisively. Cambyses conquered Egypt and declared himself pharaoh, respecting Egyptian religious customs and traditions as his father had done in Babylon. The Persian Empire now controlled virtually the entire Near East, from the Mediterranean to India, from the Black Sea to the Indian Ocean. But Cambyses' reign ended mysteriously. Herodotus claims he went mad and committed sacrilege against Egyptian religion. Other sources suggest he died of accidental injury or was assassinated. Whatever the truth, his death in 522 BCE triggered a succession crisis that nearly destroyed the empire. Darius the Great, the organizer. Into this chaos stepped Darius I, a member of the Achaemenid royal family, but not Cyrus's direct descendant. How he came to power is unclear. His own account, inscribed on the Behistun rock, claims he defeated numerous rebels and usurpers who had seized power after Cambyses' death. Modern historians suspect Darius himself may have been the usurper, and his inscription is propaganda justifying his coup. Regardless of how he seized power, Darius proved to be one of history's great rulers, not a brilliant conqueror like Cyrus, but a superb administrator who organized and institutionalized the empire. He divided the empire into about 20 satrapies, provinces, each governed by a satrap, governor, responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and providing troops. Darius created the king's eyes and ears, royal inspectors who traveled the empire checking on satraps, ensuring they weren't becoming too independent or oppressive. He standardized taxation, establishing what each province owed based on its resources and productivity. He minted the first international gold currency, the daric, which became the standard coin across the empire. He built roads. The Royal Road stretched 1,600 miles from Susa to Sardis, with way stations every 15 miles, where fresh horses waited for royal messengers. A courier could travel the route in 7 days, an unprecedented speed for the ancient world. Herodotus wrote admiringly, "Neither snow nor rain, nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds," words later adopted, in modified form, as the motto of the U.S. Postal Service. Darius built magnificent capitals. He expanded Cyrus's city of Pasargadae, developed Susa into an administrative center, and constructed Persepolis, the ceremonial capital that would become the symbol of Persian imperial glory. Persepolis's ruins remain one of the ancient world's most impressive sights. Massive stone platforms, towering columns, detailed reliefs showing tribute bearers from every corner of the empire bringing gifts to the King of Kings. The title King of Kings, Shahanshah in Persian, expressed the Persian imperial ideology. The great king ruled over subordinate kings who managed their territories autonomously as long as they paid tribute and provided troops. This relatively light imperial touch, compared to direct military occupation and cultural suppression, made Persian rule sustainable across vast distances and diverse peoples. The Greco-Persian Wars, clash of civilizations. Darius's reign saw the beginning of a conflict that would define Mediterranean history for centuries, the wars between Persia and Greece. The conflict began when Greek cities in Ionia, western Anatolia, which Persia controlled, rebelled in 499 BCE. Athens and Eretria sent aid to the rebels, angering Darius. The Persians crushed the Ionian revolt by 494 BCE. But Darius didn't forget Athens's interference. In 490 BCE, he sent a punitive expedition to Greece. The Persian fleet crossed the Aegean, destroyed Eretria, and landed at Marathon, a plain northeast of Athens. The Athenians, heavily outnumbered, faced an impossible situation, but through brilliant generalship by Miltiades and the courage of their heavily armored hoplites, the Athenians won a stunning victory. The Persians retreated, having lost perhaps 6,400 men to Athens's 192. A messenger ran 26 miles from Marathon to Athens to announce the victory, then collapsed and died. The origin of the modern marathon race. Marathon became legendary in Greek culture, proof that free men fighting for their city could defeat the despotic Persian hordes. But from the Persian perspective, Marathon was a minor setback in a distant province. The empire was vast. Greece was a collection of quarreling city-states on its western fringe. Darius planned a larger invasion, but died in 486 BCE before launching it. His son Xerxes Thardai inherited both the throne and the unfinished war with Greece. Xerxes and the Great Invasion. Xerxes, determined to complete his father's work, assembled one of ancient history's largest military forces. According to Herodotus, the army numbered 2.6 million men. Certainly an exaggeration, but even conservative modern estimates suggest 200,000 to 300,000 troops, supported by a fleet of perhaps 1,200 ships. It was an unprecedented show of force. In 480 BCE, Xerxes invaded. His engineers built pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, the Dardanelles Strait, lashing hundreds of ships together to create a roadway for the army. When storms destroyed the first bridges, Xerxes allegedly ordered the sea whipped 300 times for its disobedience, a story the Greeks told to illustrate Persian hubris. The Persian army marched through Thrace and Macedonia into northern Greece. At Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass, 300 Spartans under King Leonidas, along with perhaps 7,000 other Greeks, held the Persians for 3 days before a traitor showed the Persians a mountain path to outflank the defenders. The Spartans, refusing to retreat, fought to the last man. Thermopylae became an eternal symbol of heroic resistance against overwhelming odds. The Persians marched south, captured Athens, whose population had evacuated, and burned the Acropolis in revenge for the burning of Sardis during the Ionian Revolt. But the Athenian fleet, under Themistocles, lured the Persian navy into the narrow strait at Salamis and destroyed it. Xerxes, unable to supply his army without naval support, retreated to Persia, leaving a large force under General Mardonius to continue the campaign. In 479 BCE at Plataea, the Greeks defeated Mardonius's army, and the Persian invasion ended. Greece had survived, though barely. The Greco-Persian wars continued sporadically for decades, but Persia never again seriously threatened mainland Greece. For Persia, the Greek wars were a frustrating failure on the empire's periphery, but not existential. For Greece, they were a defining triumph that shaped Western identity. The contrast between Greek freedom and Persian despotism, between Western civilization and Eastern barbarism, became a foundational narrative, one that ignored how sophisticated, tolerant, and culturally rich the Persian Empire actually was. Persepolis, the heart of empire. At its height under Darius and Xerxes, the Achaemenid Empire was the world's first true superpower. At Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, the empire's grandeur was on full display. Persepolis wasn't just a city, but a statement. I am the king of kings, and all the world's peoples acknowledge my authority. The Apadana, the great audience hall, could hold 10,000 people. Its columns soared 65 feet high. The walls bore relief carvings showing representatives from 23 subject nations bringing tribute. Babylonians with cloth and bowls, Armenians with horses, Bactrians with camels, Indians with gold, Ethiopians with ivory and exotic animals. The reliefs didn't depict conquest or subjugation, but peaceful procession and willing tribute. The Persian imperial ideology emphasized that the King of Kings protected his subjects, maintained order and justice, and ensured prosperity. In return, subjects paid taxes and provided soldiers. It was a contract, not pure domination. The Achaemenid Empire was genuinely multicultural. The court spoke multiple languages: Old Persian, Elamite, Aramaic, Babylonian. Royal inscriptions appeared in cuneiform and other scripts. Officials came from across the empire. Cyrus's tomb had been designed by Greek architects. The empire's wealth came from its diversity and its ability to harness different people's skills and resources. Religion was generally tolerated. Zoroastrianism was the royal faith, but subjects could worship as they pleased. Jews rebuilt their temple. Babylonians honored Marduk. Egyptians worshipped their gods. Greeks maintained their temples. This tolerance was both principled. Zoroastrianism valued truth and good works over forced conversion, and practical. Religious oppression caused expensive rebellions. The decline and fall to Alexander. After Xerxes was assassinated in 465 BCE, the Achaemenid Empire gradually weakened. Later kings faced revolts, court intrigues, and succession disputes. The empire remained powerful, and its administrative system continued functioning. But the dynamism of Cyrus and Darius was gone. By the mid-4th century BCE, Persia still controlled a vast territory, but cracks showed. Egypt frequently rebelled. Satraps occasionally revolted. The empire's military, once formidable, became dependent on Greek mercenaries, a sign of both wealth — Persia could afford to hire the best soldiers — and weakness. Its own military institutions had decayed. Then came Alexander. In 336 BCE, Philip II of Macedon was assassinated, and his 20-year-old son Alexander inherited a unified Greece and Philip's planned invasion of Persia, presented as revenge for Xerxes' invasion 150 years earlier. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed into Asia with perhaps 40,000 to 50,000 troops. The Persian king, Darius III, initially underestimated him. At the Granicus River, Alexander defeated a Persian force and liberated the Greek cities of Ionia. At Issus in 333 BCE, Alexander met Darius III's main army, perhaps 100,000 strong, and through brilliant tactics destroyed it, sending Darius fleeing. Alexander marched down the Levantine coast, besieged and captured Tyre, a 7-month siege requiring unprecedented engineering, and took Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule and crowned pharaoh. In 331 BCE, at Gaugamela in northern Iraq, Alexander faced Darius's last great army. Despite being heavily outnumbered, modern estimates suggest Darius had perhaps 100,000 men to Alexander's 40,000 to 50,000. Alexander's superior tactics, combined with the discipline of his Macedonian phalanx and the shock power of his companion cavalry, won the day. Darius fled again and was later murdered by his own satraps. Alexander entered Babylon as a conqueror, but also as the new king of kings. He adopted Persian court ceremonies, appointed Persians to high positions, and married Roxana, a Bactrian princess. He tried to merge Macedonian and Persian elites, encouraging his generals to marry Persian noblewomen. Most resisted, seeing Persians as defeated enemies, not partners in empire. In 330 BCE, Alexander arrived at Persepolis. After extracting its treasury, reportedly requiring thousands of mules to transport the gold and silver, Alexander allowed or ordered his troops to burn the city. Ancient sources differ on whether this was drunken accident or deliberate revenge for Xerxes' burning of Athens. Either way, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire went up in flames. The Achaemenid Empire was dead. The dynasty that had ruled for over 2 centuries, that had built the ancient world's greatest empire, that had developed sophisticated administration and religious tolerance, was erased by a Macedonian youth who would himself die at 32. leaving an empire that immediately fragmented. But Persia wasn't finished. The land, the culture, the people endured, and they would rise again. Part 3. Between Empires, the Seleucids and Parthians, Alexander's death, and the Diadochi. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE, aged just 32, possibly from fever, possibly from poisoning, possibly from alcoholism. His empire, which stretched from Greece to India, immediately descended into civil war among his generals, the Diadochi successors. Perdiccas, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, Lysimachus. These generals fought for decades, carving Alexander's empire into kingdoms. Seleucus, who had served as Alexander's cavalry commander, emerged as ruler of most of the former Persian Empire, including Iran, Mesopotamia, and parts of Central Asia. The Seleucid Empire, as it became known, would rule Iran for nearly a century. The Seleucids, Greeks in Persia. The Seleucids tried to rule as Alexander had envisioned, a fusion of Greek and Persian traditions. They founded Greek cities across Iran and Central Asia, established Greek as the administrative language, promoted Greek culture and philosophy, but also respected local customs and religions. For Iranians, this was a period of cultural tension. The ruling class was Greek and Macedonian. The language of power and prestige was Greek. Cities like Seleucia on Tigris were built in Greek style with gymnasiums and theaters. Young Iranian nobles learned Greek to advance their careers. But beneath this Greek veneer, Iranian culture persisted. Zoroastrian priests maintained their traditions. Persian language continued in daily life. Local aristocrats ruled their territories much as they had under the Achaemenids, now owing allegiance to Greek kings instead of Persian ones. The Seleucids faced constant challenges: wars with the Ptolemies in Egypt over the Levant, rebellions in the eastern provinces, pressure from nomadic tribes in Central Asia, and the growing power of Rome in the west. Gradually, the empire shrank. The Parthian Revolution around 247 BCE in northeastern Iran, the region of Parthia near modern Turkmenistan, a group of semi-nomadic people called the Parni, led by a chieftain named Arsaces, rebelled against Seleucid rule. The Seleucids, distracted by wars elsewhere, couldn't suppress the revolt. Arsaces established an independent kingdom that would become the Parthian Empire. For over a century, the Parthians expanded slowly westward, conquering Iranian territory from the weakening Seleucids under Mithridates I, 171 to 132 BCE. They captured Mesopotamia and made the ancient city of Ctesiphon on the Tigris River their capital. The Parthians now controlled the crucial trade routes between east and west. The Silk Road passed through their territory, bringing Chinese silk, Central Asian horses, and Indian spices to the Mediterranean world. The Parthian state, feudal empire. The Parthian Empire differed fundamentally from the Achaemenids. The Achaemenids had been a centralized state with a powerful king supported by a professional bureaucracy. The Parthians were more feudal. The king of kings ruled, but powerful noble families controlled their own territories with considerable autonomy. The king was first among equals, not an absolute monarch. This decentralization had advantages and disadvantages. It made the empire resilient. If one region fell, others could continue resisting. But it also made coordinated military action difficult and encouraged internal conflicts. Culturally, the Parthians began the Iranian Renaissance. After centuries of Greek rule, Iran reasserted its identity. Middle Persian, Pahlavi language revived. Zoroastrianism regained prominence. Iranian artistic traditions, miniature painting, elaborate textiles, metalworking flourished. The Parthians saw themselves as restorers of the Achaemenid tradition, heirs to Cyrus and Darius, Rome versus Parthia, the eternal rivalry. The Parthian Empire's western neighbor was Rome, the rising Mediterranean superpower. For over 3 centuries, Rome and Parthia fought, neither able to permanently defeat the other. It was one of history's great rivalries, an early version of the Cold War. The first major clash came in 53 BCE, when the triumvir Marcus Licinius Crassus, seeking military glory to match his rivals Pompey and Caesar, invaded Parthia. At the Battle of Carrhae, Parthian horse archers destroyed Crassus's legions. Crassus himself was killed, and his head was allegedly used as a prop in a performance of Euripides's The Bacchae at the Parthian court. It was Rome's worst military disaster in a century. The pattern established at Carrhae repeated for centuries. Roman legions would invade, sometimes capturing Ctesiphon, but they could never hold the territory. Parthian cavalry, heavy armored cataphracts and swift horse archers, could defeat Roman heavy infantry in the open terrain of Mesopotamia and Iran. The Parthians couldn't conquer Roman territory either. Their feudal army was unsuited for siege warfare and permanent occupation. The conflict was also ideological. Rome saw itself as the civilized world, bringing order and law to barbarians. Parthia saw itself as the heir to ancient Persia's imperial tradition, equal or superior to Rome. Both empires claimed universal authority. Both had to tolerate the other's existence. The rivalry shaped both empires. Rome's eastern frontier required massive military investment. Parthia's western provinces were constantly contested. The competition drove innovation in military tactics, diplomacy, and administration. Parthian culture, revival of Iranian identity. Under the Parthians, Iranian culture revived after centuries of Greek dominance. The Parthian kings styled themselves as heirs to the Achaemenids, using Old Persian titles and claiming descent from Achaemenid royalty, whether true or not. Epic poetry flourished, telling stories of ancient Iranian heroes. The foundations of the later Shahnameh, the great Persian epic, trace back to Parthian-era oral traditions. The stories of Rustam and other legendary warriors began taking shape. Zoroastrianism remained the dominant religion, though the Parthians tolerated other faiths. Buddhist missionaries traveled the Silk Road through Parthian territory. Jewish communities flourished in Babylonia. Early Christianity spread into Parthian lands, creating communities that would later become the Assyrian Church of the East. Art blended Iranian and Hellenistic traditions. Parthian architecture combined Greek columns with Iranian arches and vaults. Sculptures showed Iranian clothing and poses but Greek artistic techniques. This synthesis would influence later Islamic art. Trade brought prosperity. The Parthians controlled the middle section of the Silk Road. Chinese silk bound for Rome passed through their territory, as did Roman goods heading east. The Parthians taxed this trade and acted as middlemen, sometimes blocking direct contact between Rome and China to maintain their commercial advantage. The fall of the Parthians. By the early 3rd century CE, the Parthian Empire was weakening. Constant wars with Rome drained resources. Internal conflicts between the king and powerful nobles undermined unity. The feudal system that had provided resilience now caused paralysis. In the province of Fars, Persis, the original Persian heartland, a local ruler named Ardashir began to challenge Parthian authority. He claimed descent from the Achaemenids, and styled himself as a Persian nationalist, criticizing the Parthian kings as foreign usurpers who had abandoned true Iranian traditions. In 224 CE, Ardashir defeated the last Parthian king, Artabanus IV, in battle. The Parthian Empire collapsed with surprising speed. Ardashir declared himself king of kings and founded the Sassanian Empire, named after his grandfather Sassan. Iran's third great empire was about to begin. Part 4, the Sassanian Empire, Iran's Golden Age. Ardashir and the Restoration. Ardashir I, 224 to 241 CE, presented himself as the restorer of proper Iranian kingship. He emphasized continuity with the Achaemenids, even adopting their imagery and titles. He centralized power, reducing the autonomy of the nobility that had characterized Parthian rule. Ardashir made Zoroastrianism the official state religion, in a way the Achaemenids and Parthians never had. He elevated the position of the chief priest, Mobadan Mobad, to near-equal status with the king. Religion and state became intertwined as never before in Iranian history. He reorganized the administration, creating a professional bureaucracy. He reformed the military, establishing a standing army of heavily armored cavalry, cataphracts, as the elite force, supported by infantry and horse archers. He rebuilt cities, constructed roads and bridges, and promoted trade and agriculture. Ardashir established the Sassanian ideology, Iran as a divinely ordained empire, the King of Kings as God's representative on earth, and Zoroastrianism as the true faith that must be protected and promoted. This ideology would shape Iran for over 4 centuries. Shapur I, the victor, over Rome, Ardashir's son, Shapur I, 241 to 272 CE, became one of Iran's greatest warrior kings. His ambition was to destroy Rome's eastern provinces and restore the Achaemenid Empire's full extent. Shapur fought 3 major campaigns against Rome, defeating 3 different emperors. In 244 CE, he forced Emperor Philip the Arab to pay tribute. In 253 to 260 CE, he invaded Syria and Anatolia, capturing dozens of cities. Most spectacularly, at the Battle of Edessa in 260 CE, Shapur defeated and captured the Roman Emperor Valerian, an unprecedented humiliation for Rome. Valerian spent the rest of his life in captivity. Legend says Shapur used the captured emperor as a human footstool when mounting his horse. Whether true or not, Shapur commissioned rock reliefs showing Valerian kneeling before him, visible propaganda of Persian triumph over Rome. Shapur was tolerant toward religions. He welcomed Mani, the prophet who founded Manichaeism, a dualistic faith drawing on Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and Christianity. Though later Sassanian kings would persecute Manichaeism, Shapur saw religious diversity as enriching his empire. Under Shapur, the Sassanian Empire reached from Mesopotamia to Central Asia, from the Caucasus to the Persian Gulf. It was a superpower rivaling Rome and later Byzantium as an equal. Sassanian society, the 4 classes. The Sassanians organized society into 4 distinct classes, each with specific roles and responsibilities. Priests, Azranan, Zoroastrian clergy, maintaining religious rituals, preserving sacred texts, advising the king on spiritual matters, and serving as judges, interpreting religious law. Warriors, Arteshtaran, the military aristocracy, heavily armored cavalry knights who fought for the empire. This class included the great noble families who held land and provided troops. Scribes, Dabiran, administrators, bureaucrats, scholars, physicians, and secretaries who ran the empire's administration. This class provided social mobility for talented individuals. Commoners, Vastrioshan, farmers, artisans, merchants, and laborers, the vast majority of the population who paid taxes and provided the economic foundation. This rigid class structure limited mobility, but provided stability and clear social order. Everyone knew their role and responsibilities. Sassanian culture, a second golden age. The Sassanian period saw an extraordinary flowering of Iranian culture. Zoroastrianism reached its most sophisticated theological development. The sacred texts, the Avesta, were systematically collected, organized, and written down after centuries of oral transmission. Theological commentaries elaborated complex cosmologies and ethical systems. Architecture achieved new heights. Sassanian builders perfected the vault and dome, creating massive audience halls and fire temples. The great arch at Ctesiphon, built by Shapur I, spans over 80 feet and stands nearly 120 feet high, the largest brick arch in the world until modern times. It still stands today, a testament to Sassanian engineering. Art flourished, intricate silverwork, elaborate textiles. Sassanian silk patterns influenced medieval European and Islamic art. Detailed rock reliefs, sophisticated metalworking, and complex geometric designs. Sassanian art combined Iranian traditions with influences from Rome, India, and Central Asia. Science and medicine advanced. Sassanian physicians studied Greek medical texts, combined them with Indian medical knowledge from Ayurveda, and developed sophisticated treatments. The academy at Gundashapur became a renowned center of medical education, preserving Greek scientific knowledge that would later be transmitted to the Islamic world. Literature and music thrived. Epic poetry celebrating Iranian heroes and kings was composed and performed at court. Musicians developed the modal system that would influence later Persian and Arabic music. The stories of ancient heroes like Rustam were elaborated and standardized. The eternal war with Rome/Byzantium. The Sassanian-Roman conflict continued for over 4 centuries, with devastating consequences for both empires. The pattern repeated: invasion, counter-invasion, siege, payment of tribute, temporary peace, then renewed warfare. Sometimes Persia advanced, capturing Roman cities. Sometimes Rome, later Byzantium, invaded Iran, briefly occupying Ctesiphon. Neither could deliver a knockout blow. The frontier cities of Mesopotamia and the Caucasus changed hands repeatedly, their population suffering under alternating occupations. Notable campaigns include Julian's invasion, 363 CE. Roman Emperor Julian invaded Persia, reaching Ctesiphon's walls before his supplies ran out and he was killed in battle. The Romans retreated with heavy losses. Khosrow I's conquests, 540s CE. Khosrow I temporarily captured the great city of Antioch, one of the Roman Empire's largest cities, and extracted massive tribute from Emperor Justinian. The Great War, 602 to 628 CE. The final catastrophic conflict. Persian forces under Khosrow II conquered Syria, Palestine, capturing the True Cross from Jerusalem, Egypt, and much of Anatolia. The Byzantine Empire seemed finished, but Emperor Heraclius launched a desperate counterattack, invading Persia itself and defeating the Sassanian army. Both empires were exhausted and bankrupt. This last war destroyed both empires' ability to resist the Arab-Islamic conquests that would begin just years later. The eternal rivals, had fought themselves to mutual exhaustion. Khosrow I, Anushirvan, the just king Khosrow I, 531 to 579 CE, called Anushirvan, immortal soul, is remembered as perhaps the greatest Sassanian monarch. He reformed the tax system, making it fairer and more efficient. He reorganized the military, creating a more professional standing army. He patronized arts and sciences, turning his court into a center of learning. When the Byzantine Emperor Justinian closed the Platonic Academy in Athens in 529 CE, seeing pagan philosophy as dangerous to Christian orthodoxy, several philosophers fled to Khosrow's court, bringing with them Greek philosophical texts. Khosrow welcomed them, had their works translated, and engaged them in philosophical debates. Later, when tensions eased, he allowed them to return to Byzantium on the condition that Justinian guaranteed their safety, a remarkable act of cultural diplomacy. Khosrow commissioned the game of chess, shatranj, to be brought from India and the rules codified. He had Indian texts on mathematics, astronomy, and medicine translated into Pahlavi. He promoted agricultural development, building irrigation systems and founding new towns. Under Khosrow, the Sassanian Empire reached its cultural and administrative zenith. His reign represented a balance of military strength, economic prosperity, cultural achievement, and relatively just governance. The end of the Sassanians. The final Sassanian king, Yazdegerd III, 632 to 651 CE, inherited an empire in crisis. The long war with Byzantium had drained the treasury and military strength. Plague had ravaged cities. Climate change may have caused agricultural failures. Political stability had collapsed into noble factionalism. And then came the Arabs. In 636 CE, at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, Arab Muslim forces defeated the Sassanian army. In 637 CE, they captured Ctesiphon. Arab armies poured into the Iranian plateau. At Nahavand in 642 CE, the Sassanians made their last stand and were crushed. Yazdegerd fled eastward, seeking allies in Central Asia. In 651 CE, he was murdered near Merv by a local miller, allegedly for his jewelry. The Sassanian Empire was over. For the first time in over a millennium, Iran was conquered by foreign invaders who didn't adopt Iranian culture but instead imposed their own religion, language, and civilization. It seemed like the end of Iranian identity itself. But once again, Iran would survive, adapt, and ultimately transform its conquerors as much as being transformed by them. Part 5. Islamic Iran, Conquest and Transformation. The Arab-Islamic conquest. The Arab armies that conquered Iran in the 640s were motivated by religious zeal and the promise of plunder. They saw themselves as bringing the true faith to fire-worshipping pagans. The Sassanian Empire, exhausted by war and internal conflict, crumbled with surprising speed. For Iranians, the conquest was catastrophic. The Zoroastrian faith, which had been Iran's religion for over a millennium, suddenly faced suppression. Fire temples were destroyed or converted into mosques. The Zoroastrian priesthood, which had been central to Iranian society, lost its position and wealth. Iranians faced a choice: convert to Islam, pay the jizya tax as non-Muslims, or face persecution. Many Iranians initially resisted. Revolts broke out across the plateau, some led by remaining Sassanian nobles, others by local strongmen. But the Arab Caliphate, first under the Rashidun caliphs and then the Umayyad dynasty, gradually consolidated control. Conversion and resistance conversion to Islam was gradual, taking several centuries. Initially, Arab conquerors actually discouraged Iranian conversion. They wanted to maintain their Arab Muslim elite status and collect taxes from non-Muslim subjects. But economic incentives, avoiding the jizya tax, social pressure, and genuine religious conviction gradually led most Iranians to convert. The process was uneven. Cities converted faster than rural areas. The nobility converted to maintain status and position. Merchants and artisans converted to avoid economic discrimination. But resistance persisted, especially in mountainous regions like Mazandaran and Fars, where Zoroastrian communities survived and still survive today in small numbers. Some Iranians fled rather than convert. Zoroastrian refugees migrated to India, where they became the Parsi community. Preserving Iranian Zoroastrian traditions for over a millennium, the Abbasid Revolution, Iranian influence returns. In 750 CE, the Umayyad Caliphate, based in Damascus and dominated by Arab nobility, was overthrown by the Abbasid Revolution. The Abbasids claimed descent from Abbas, Muhammad's uncle, but their real support came from disaffected groups in Iran and Central Asia, especially in the region of Khorasan. The Abbasids moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, significantly in Mesopotamia, the historical heartland of Iranian empires. They brought Iranian administrative practices, court ceremonies, and cultural traditions into the Islamic Caliphate. Persian, now called Farsi, began influencing Arabic. Iranian convert families rose to high positions as viziers and governors. This was the beginning of Iran's revenge. Conquered militarily, Iranians began conquering culturally. The Abbasid Caliphate, though Arab in language and religion, became increasingly Persian in administration, culture, and style. The position of vizier, chief minister, borrowed from Sassanian administration, became central to Islamic governance. The Iranian dynasties, independence returns. As the Abbasid Caliphate weakened in the 9th to 10th centuries, Iranian dynasties began establishing autonomous and then independent states. The Tahirids, 821-873 CE, in Khorasan, were the first, beginning as Abbasid governors who gradually became independent rulers while nominally acknowledging the caliph's spiritual authority. The Safavids, 861 to 1003 CE, founded by Yaqub ibn al-Layth al-Safar, a coppersmith turned warlord, controlled eastern Iran. Yaqub famously rejected the caliph's offer of a governorship, replying in Persian, not Arabic, that he didn't understand the caliph's flowery Arabic letter and didn't care for titles, a symbolic assertion of Iranian identity. The Samanids, 819 to 999 CE, created a sophisticated state in Central Asia and eastern Iran, with their capital at Bukhara. They patronized Persian literature and scholarship, supporting poets like Rudaki, often called the father of Persian poetry. Under Samanid patronage, Persian literature was reborn as a high literary language. These dynasties were Muslim, but they were also consciously Iranian. They promoted Persian language and culture, referenced the pre-Islamic Iranian past, and created a synthesis of Islamic faith and Iranian identity that would define Iran for centuries. Ferdowsi and the Shahnameh, the national epic. In the early 11th century, a poet named Ferdowsi completed one of world literature's greatest works, the Shahnameh, Book of Kings. This epic poem, over 50,000 couplets long, tells the history of Iran from mythical creation through the Arab conquest. Ferdowsi deliberately wrote in pure Persian, avoiding Arabic loanwords where possible. His project was cultural resistance, preserving Iranian identity, history, and language within an Islamic world dominated by Arabic. The Shahnameh tells of legendary kings and heroes, Jamshid, Feridun, Rostam, and of the eternal struggle between Iran and Turan, Central Asia, between civilization and barbarism, between order and chaos. The Shahnameh became Iran's national epic. Every educated Iranian knew its stories. It preserved pre-Islamic Iranian mythology and values while existing within an Islamic framework. It asserted that Iran had a glorious past independent of and prior to Islam, that Iranian identity was distinct and valuable, and that Iranians were heirs to a great civilization. Ferdowsi's work ensured that Iran, alone among Islamic lands, maintained a strong pre-Islamic historical consciousness. While other Muslim peoples saw their history beginning with Islam, Iranians saw Islam as one chapter in a much longer story. Part 6. The Turkic dynasties and Mongol catastrophe. The Ghaznavids and Seljuks, Turks in Iran. From the 10th century onward, Turkic peoples from Central Asia began moving into Iran. These migrations would fundamentally reshape Iranian society. The Ghaznavids, 977 to 1186 CE, a Turkic dynasty that first served the Sassanids, established an empire stretching from eastern Iran into India. They conducted devastating raids into India, bringing back enormous wealth. The Seljuk Turks, 1037 to 1194 CE, conquered much of Iran, Iraq, and Anatolia, creating one of the medieval world's most powerful empires. Though Turkish in origin and language, the Seljuks adopted Persian administrative practices and culture. Persian became the language of administration and high culture in their empire. Their viziers were Iranian, most famously Nizam al-Mulk, who wrote the Siyasatnama, a Persian language manual on governance. Under the Seljuks, Persian culture spread to Anatolia and Central Asia. What emerged was a Turco-Persian synthesis, Turkish military power, combined with Persian administrative skill and culture. This pattern, Turkish dynasties ruling through Persian bureaucrats and patronizing Persian culture, would continue for centuries. The Seljuk period saw magnificent cultural achievements. The mathematician and poet Omar Khayyam served at the Seljuk court, reforming the calendar and writing the Rubaiyat, whose philosophical poetry would later be popularized in the West by Edward Fitzgerald's translation. The philosopher-theologian Al-Ghazali reconciled Islamic theology with Greek philosophy, profoundly influencing Islamic thought. The Ismaili assassins, extremism in the mountains. In the late 11th century, an Ismaili Shi'a sect, led by Hassani Saba, established a state in the mountains of northern Iran, centered on the fortress of Alamut. They became known as the Assassins, from Hashishin, though the connection to hashish is probably mythological. The Assassins practiced political murder as a religious duty, targeting Sunni leaders, including viziers and sultans. They were remarkably effective, creating a climate of fear across the Islamic world. Their victims included Nizam al-Mulk himself, the great Seljuk vizier. The assassins created a mystique of invincibility and fanaticism. Their willingness to die in suicide missions, their hidden fortresses, their infiltration of enemy courts, all contributed to their legend. They survived for over 150 years before being destroyed by the Mongols. The Mongol catastrophe, Iran's darkest hour. In the early 13th century, the Mongol Empire, having conquered China and Central Asia, turned toward Iran. In 1219 to 1221, CE, Genghis Khan invaded Khwarazm, northeastern Iran and Central Asia, in response to the murder of Mongol envoys. The devastation was apocalyptic. Cities like Nishapur, Merv, Herat, and Balkh were systematically destroyed. According to contemporary accounts, certainly exaggerated but reflecting genuine horror, populations were massacred, irrigation systems deliberately destroyed, and agricultural lands turned into wasteland. The Mongols wanted to transform Iran into pasture for their horses. A generation later, in 1256 to 1258 CE, Hulagu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, invaded again, destroying the Ismaili assassin state and then conquering Baghdad, ending the Abbasid Caliphate. Iran became part of the Mongol Empire, ruled by Hulagu's descendants, the Ilkhanate. The Mongol invasions were Iran's greatest demographic and cultural catastrophe. Some estimates suggest the population dropped from 2.5 million to 250,000 in some regions. Entire cities vanished. Irrigation works that had taken centuries to build were destroyed. Libraries burned. Scholars were killed. It would take Iran centuries to recover. The Ilkhanate, Mongols become Persian. But once again, Iran demonstrated its cultural resilience. The Ilkhan Mongols, ruling from Tabriz, gradually adopted Iranian culture. They married Iranian women. They employed Iranian viziers. They patronized Persian poets and artists. They converted to Islam, first some to Buddhism, then to Shi'a Islam, and finally to Sunni Islam. By the early 14th century, the Mongol Ilkhans were virtually indistinguishable from previous Iranian dynasties. They spoke Persian, practiced Islam, and patronized Persian culture. The conquerors had been absorbed. The Ilkhanate period saw a cultural renaissance. Under the patronage of Ghazan Khan and Olyotu, magnificent buildings were constructed. Persian miniature painting reached new heights, and historical works like Rashid al-Din's Jami al-Tawarik, Compendium of Chronicles, were produced. When the Ilkhanate collapsed in the 1330s, Iran fragmented into numerous small dynasties, but Persian culture remained dominant. Timur, Tamerlane, the last great conqueror. In the late 14th century, Timur, a Turco-Mongol warlord from Central Asia, claiming descent from Genghis Khan, conquered Iran as part of his creation of a vast empire. Timur was even more brutal than the original Mongols, building pyramids of skulls and devastating cities. But Timur also fancied himself a patron of culture. His capital, Samarkand, became a center of Persian art, architecture, and learning. He brought artisans and scholars from conquered cities to beautify his capital. His court spoke Persian. His grandson, Ulugh Beg, would become a renowned astronomer and mathematician. Timur's empire fragmented after his death in 1405 CE, but his descendants, the Timurids, created a sophisticated Persian Islamic culture that would influence the later Mughal Empire in India. Through repeated invasions and conquests, Iran survived by absorbing its conquerors. The pattern repeated. Militarily powerful nomadic conquerors, Arabs, Turks, Mongols, Turco-Mongols, would take political control. But Iranian culture, administration, and identity would persist and ultimately transform the new rulers. Part 7. The Safavid Empire. Shia Iran is born, the rise of Shah Ismail. In 1501 CE, a 14-year-old boy named Ismail, leader of a Sufi order called the Safavids, conquered Tabriz and declared himself Shah of Iran. More importantly, he declared Twelver Shia Islam the official religion of his new empire. This was revolutionary. Iran had been predominantly Sunni for centuries. The Safavids forcibly converted the population to Shi'ism, often through brutal methods. Sunni scholars were given the choice: convert, flee, or die. Shia clergy from Arab lands were imported to replace them. Why did Ismail do this? Partly religious conviction. The Safavids genuinely believed in Shia Islam, but also political calculation. Shi'ism distinguished Iran from its Sunni neighbors, the Ottoman Empire to the west and the Uzbeks to the east. It created a unique Iranian Shia identity that unified the diverse population. The conversion succeeded. Within a century, Iran transformed from predominantly Sunni to predominantly Shia, a demographic reality that persists today. Iran became the defender of Shia Islam, a role it still plays. The Safavid state, a new Iranian empire. The Safavids created a powerful centralized state. They established a standing army of slave soldiers, gulams, mostly Armenian and Georgian Christians captured or purchased as children, converted to Shi'ism, and raised as loyal warriors. This reduced the dynasty's dependence on unreliable Turkic tribal cavalry. They reorganized administration, creating an efficient bureaucracy. They promoted trade, making Iran a crucial link on trade routes between East and West. Armenian merchants, given special privileges, established commercial networks stretching from Amsterdam to India. The Safavid capital, first at Tabriz, then at Qazvin, and finally at Isfahan, became centers of magnificent architecture, art, and culture. Isfahan under Shah Abbas I, 1588 to 1629 CE, became one of the world's most beautiful cities, with the famous slogan, Isfahan Nesfe Jahan. Isfahan is half the world. Shah Abbas the Great, the Renaissance king, Shah Abbas I, transformed Iran into a major power. He reorganized the military, creating an effective force that could challenge the Ottomans. He recaptured territories lost to the Ottomans and Uzbeks. He moved the capital to Isfahan and turned it into a showcase of Persian Islamic civilization. The Naqshi Jahan Square in Isfahan, one of the world's largest public squares, was surrounded by the Shah Mosque, the Sheikh Lotfollah Mosque, the Ali Kapu Palace, and the Grand Bazaar, a concentration of architectural magnificence that still astonishes visitors today. Abbas promoted religious tolerance within limits. He protected Armenian Christians, who controlled much of Iran's foreign trade. He welcomed European merchants and diplomats, playing European powers against each other to Iran's advantage. He corresponded with European monarchs, trying to form alliances against the Ottoman Empire. Under Abbas, Persian culture flourished. Miniature painting reached its peak. Persian carpets became renowned worldwide. Gardens and palaces of exquisite beauty were constructed, and poetry and literature thrived. The Safavid period is often called Iran's cultural renaissance. Safavid society and culture. Safavid Iran developed a distinct cultural synthesis. Shi'ism became central to Iranian identity, with pilgrimages to shrines at Mashhad and Qom becoming major religious and economic events. The clergy, ulama, gained significant social influence, though they remained subordinate to the Shah. Persian remained the language of culture, administration, and poetry. The Safavids self-consciously connected themselves to Iran's pre-Islamic past, using ancient titles and referencing Achaemenid and Sassanian glory. They created a narrative of Iranian history that synthesized the pre-Islamic past, Islamic faith, and Shia identity. Art flourished. Persian miniature painting, carpet weaving, calligraphy, metalwork, and ceramic arts all reached extraordinary sophistication. Safavid artists developed distinctive styles that influenced later Islamic art worldwide. The Safavid court was cosmopolitan. European travelers, merchants, and ambassadors visited Isfahan. European paintings influenced Persian miniaturists. Persian carpets and silk appeared in European royal courts. Iran was connected to global trade networks, stretching from China to Europe. The decline and fall. After Shah Abbas's death in 1629 CE, the Safavid Empire gradually declined. Later, Shahs were weaker, often controlled by the clergy or the harem. Military strength eroded. Administrative efficiency decreased. The economy suffered from European competition in trade, as European ships bypassed Iranian overland routes. In 1722 CE, Afghan forces invaded, captured Isfahan, and overthrew the Safavids. Iran descended into chaos. For several decades, various warlords fought for control. The Safavid achievement seemed destroyed, but the Safavid legacy endured. Iran remained predominantly Shi'a, maintaining a distinct religious identity. Persian culture remained vibrant, and the idea of Iran as a unified state with ancient roots persisted. The Afsharid interlude, Nader Shah. From the post-Safavid chaos emerged Nader Shah, 1736 to 1747 CE, a military genius from a Turkic tribe. Nader reunified Iran through brilliant military campaigns, then launched invasions into neighboring regions. Most spectacularly, in 1739 CE, Nader invaded Mughal India and sacked Delhi, bringing back enormous wealth, including the Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond. This invasion demonstrated that Iran, even weakened, could still project power. But Nader became increasingly paranoid and cruel. He blinded his own son on suspicion of treason. His tax policies were oppressive. In 1747 CE, his own guards assassinated him. The empire immediately fragmented. Nader's reign was meteoric but unstable, yet it demonstrated Iranian military resilience and left a legacy of treasures that symbolized Iran's historical glory. Part 8. The Qajar dynasty and the modern era. The Qajar period. Iran encounters the West. In 1794 CE, Aga Muhammad Khan Qajar unified Iran under a new dynasty. The Qajars would rule for over a century, presiding over Iran's difficult confrontation with Western imperial powers. The Qajar period saw Iran squeezed between expanding Russian and British empires. Russia conquered the Caucasus, territories Iran had controlled for centuries. Britain dominated the Persian Gulf and interfered in Iranian politics to protect its routes to India. In two catastrophic wars, the Russo-Persian War of 1804 to 1813 and 1826 to 1828, Iran lost Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan to Russia. The treaties of Gulistan and Turkmenchai were national humiliations, imposing extraterritorial rights on Russia and heavy financial indemnities on Iran. Iran faced the classic dilemma of 19th century non-Western states: how to modernize and resist Western domination without losing cultural identity. The Qajars attempted modernization, creating Western-style military units, sending students to Europe, establishing the first modern schools and printing presses. But reform was piecemeal and often superficial. The Qajar Shahs, particularly Nasir al-Din Shah, 1848 to 1896 CE, were more interested in lavish spending and European travel than systematic modernization. Corruption was endemic. The state was weak, unable to resist foreign pressure or effectively govern. The tobacco protest, the first modern protest. In 1890 CE, Nasir al-Din Shah granted a British subject, Major Gerald Talbot, a monopoly over the production, sale, and export of tobacco. This concession, made in exchange for personal payments to the Shah, outraged Iranians across the social spectrum. Merchants resented foreign control of a major commodity. The clergy denounced selling Iran's resources to foreigners. Intellectuals criticized the Shah's corruption. In an unprecedented display of unity, Iranians launched a nationwide boycott of tobacco. The clergy issued a fatwa declaring tobacco use forbidden while under foreign control. Iranians, even in the Shah's own household, stopped smoking. The protest succeeded. In 1892, the Shah canceled the concession. The tobacco protest demonstrated several crucial developments: the power of clerical leadership to mobilize mass action, the emergence of a public sphere where political issues were debated, and Iranians' willingness to resist foreign economic domination. Was a preview of later constitutional and revolutionary movements. The Constitutional Revolution, 1905 to 1911. In 1905 to 1906 CE, building on the tobacco protest precedent, a coalition of merchants, clergy, and intellectuals demanded constitutional limits on royal power. After massive protests and a sit-in at the British Embassy, the Shah conceded, agreeing to a constitution and an elected parliament, modules. The Constitution of 1906 established a constitutional monarchy, guaranteed rights, and created Iran's first parliament. It was a remarkable achievement, making Iran the first constitutional government in Asia. But the victory was incomplete. The new Shah, Muhammad Ali Shah, opposed constitutional limits. With Russian support, he bombarded the modules in 1908, arresting constitutionalist leaders. Civil war erupted between constitutionalists and royalists. The constitutionalists, supported by popular militias and some tribal leaders, eventually won. Muhammad Ali Shah was deposed, and his young son Ahmad Shah became the figurehead of a constitutional monarchy. But foreign interference, particularly from Russia and Britain, undermined the constitutional government. The modules had authority on paper, but little real power. The constitutional revolution demonstrated Iranians' desire for political participation and limits on autocracy. But it also showed the difficulty of implementing reform when foreign powers interfered and when Iranian society remained fragmented among different interest groups. World War I and British dominance? World War I was catastrophic for Iran. Though officially neutral, Iran became a battlefield. Russian, British, Ottoman, and German forces all operated on Iranian territory. Famine, disease, and military occupation killed perhaps 20% of the population. After the war, Britain attempted to establish a protectorate over Iran through the 1919 Anglo-Persian Agreement, which would have given Britain control over Iranian finances and military. The Majlis, in a rare show of strength, rejected it overwhelmingly. But Iran was weak, divided, and impoverished. The Qajar dynasty had lost all legitimacy. The country seemed on the verge of disintegration or colonial absorption. Into this chaos stepped a military officer who would change Iran's destiny, Reza Khan. Reza Shah, forced modernization. In 1921 CE, Reza Khan, a military officer, staged a coup with British acquiescence. He became Minister of War, then Prime Minister. In 1925 CE, he convinced the modules to depose the last Qajar Shah and establish a new dynasty. Reza Khan became Reza Shah Pahlavi, founder of the Pahlavi dynasty. Reza Shah was determined to modernize Iran forcibly. Inspired by Ataturk's transformation of Turkey, he launched an authoritarian modernization program. He built Iran's first national railway, connecting the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. He created a strong centralized state, subduing tribal autonomy. He established modern schools and Tehran University. He sent students abroad for technical education. He created a Western-style legal system, reducing clerical judicial power. He built roads, factories, and modern infrastructure. He ordered Iranians to adopt family surnames. Previously, most Iranians had only personal names. He mandated Western dress, banning traditional clothing, particularly for women, forcing unveiling, which outraged religious families. He changed the country's international name from Persia to Iran, 1935, emphasizing pre-Islamic heritage. Reza Shah's reforms modernized Iran's infrastructure and administration, but his methods were autocratic and culturally insensitive. The forced unveiling particularly alienated religious families. His regime became increasingly authoritarian, suppressing dissent, controlling the press, and enriching himself and his family through land seizures and monopolies. World War II and Allied occupation. When World War II began, Reza Shah declared neutrality, but maintained ties with Nazi Germany, Britain, and the Soviet Union, needing Iran as a supply corridor to Russia and fearing German influence, invaded in 1941. The Iranian military, which Reza Shah had spent years building, collapsed in days. The Allies forced Reza Shah to abdicate in favor of his young son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Iran was occupied and used as a supply route, the Persian corridor, to send Allied aid to the Soviet Union. The occupation humiliated Iran, demonstrating that decades of modernization hadn't created genuine independence. When the war ended, Soviet forces in northern Iran refused to leave, supporting separatist movements in Azerbaijan and Kurdistan. Only American pressure and UN intervention forced their withdrawal in 1946. The oil nationalization crisis, Mossadegh, Iran's vast oil reserves, discovered in 1908, had been controlled by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC, a British company that paid Iran only a small fraction of the oil profits. By the late 1940s, Iranian nationalism focused on oil as the symbol of foreign exploitation. In 1951, CE, the Modules, led by Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, voted to nationalize the oil industry. Mossadegh, an aristocratic lawyer and passionate nationalist, became wildly popular for standing up to Britain. Britain responded with an economic blockade and froze Iranian assets. The British Navy prevented Iran from exporting oil. The resulting economic crisis created hardship and political instability. In 1953, CE, British and American intelligence agencies, MI6 and CIA, organized a coup, Operation Ajax, that overthrew Mossadegh and consolidated power under the young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The coup was driven by Cold War fears that Iran might turn to the Soviet Union and by oil company interests. The 1953 coup had profound long-term consequences. It destroyed Iran's democratic movement, demonstrated that the West would not tolerate Iranian independence, created deep resentment against Britain and America, and convinced many Iranians that only revolution, not reform, could bring real change. The Shah's White Revolution and Savak. After the coup, the Shah consolidated absolute power. In the 1960s and 70s, he launched the White Revolution, modernization reforms including land reform, women's suffrage, literacy campaigns, and industrialization. Iran's economy grew rapidly on oil revenues. Tehran became a modern metropolis. Iran became a regional power with a large, well-equipped military. But the Shah's regime was also autocratic and brutal. Savak, the secret police, tortured and imprisoned dissidents. Political parties were banned or co-opted. The press was censored. Corruption was endemic. The Shah cultivated a personality cult, crowning himself in 1967 in a ceremony deliberately evoking ancient Persian emperors. The Shah alienated multiple groups. The clergy resented his secularism, and westernization traditional merchants, bazaris, resented economic policies favoring large industries. Intellectuals and students resented authoritarianism and censorship. The urban poor resented widening inequality. Nationalists resented his close ties to America and perceived subservience to Western interests. One cleric particularly opposed the Shah, Ruhollah Khomeini, who denounced the regime's corruption, autocracy, and abandonment of Islamic values. In 1964, the Shah exiled Khomeini to Iraq and later France. It would prove a fateful mistake. The Islamic Revolution, 1979. By the late 1970s, opposition to the Shah had unified diverse groups: clerics, leftists, liberals, nationalists, traditional merchants, students, and the urban poor. The catalyst was economic downturn, combined with the Shah's increasingly erratic behavior and Savak's brutality. Protests began in 1977 to 1978. The Shah vacillated between concession and repression, satisfying no one. When troops fired on protesters in September 1978, killing hundreds in what became known as Black Friday, the revolution became unstoppable. Millions took to the streets chanting "Marg Bar Shah," death to the Shah. Strikes paralyzed the economy. The military began defecting. In January 1979, the Shah fled Iran, never to return. He died in exile in Egypt in 1980. Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran from exile in February 1979, greeted by millions. In April, after a referendum, Iran became an Islamic republic. The revolution had succeeded, but what kind of state would emerge? Closing, modern Iran and the eternal identity. The Islamic Republic, revolution. Consolidated, the Islamic Republic that emerged was unique, a theocratic system with elected institutions. Supreme religious authority, the supreme leader, initially Khomeini, stood above an elected president and parliament. It combined elements of democracy and theocracy in an unprecedented way. The early years were violent. Leftists and liberals who had supported the revolution found themselves marginalized and often imprisoned or executed. Iran's Darja minorities, Kurds, Arabs, Baha'is, faced persecution. The new regime imposed strict Islamic social codes, mandatory hijab for women, gender segregation, bans on Western culture. In September 1980, Iraq invaded Iran, beginning an 8-year war that killed perhaps 1 million people and devastated both countries. The war unified Iranians behind the revolutionary regime and created a siege mentality that the government exploited. Since then, Iran has existed in tension between revolutionary ideology and pragmatic governance, between clerical authority and popular will, between isolation and engagement with the world. Elections are held, giving Iranians some voice, but candidates must be approved by the Guardian Council, limiting choices, the eternal Persia. Through 5,000 years, through Achaemenids, Seleucids, Parthians, Sassanians, Arabs, Turks, Mongols, Safavids, Qajars, Pahlavis, and now the Islamic Republic, Iran has endured. This endurance is the miracle of Iranian civilization. Empires rose and fell. Conquerors came and went. Religions changed, languages evolved, but Iran remained Iran, Iranians remained Iranian, and Persian culture persisted. Why? Geography helped. Iran's mountains and deserts created natural boundaries, but more important was culture. The Persian language survived every conquest, carrying with it Iranian identity. Poetry, particularly the Shahnameh, preserved collective memory. Sophisticated urban civilization and administrative traditions made Iranian bureaucrats indispensable to every conqueror. Most remarkably, Iran transformed its conquerors. Arabs brought Islam, but Iranians made it Persian. Turks brought military power, but adopted Persian culture. Mongols destroyed cities, but their descendants patronized Persian poetry. Every conqueror was absorbed. Today's Iran carries all these layers. Zoroastrian fire worship echoes in Shi'a rituals. The Shahnameh's heroes are still beloved. Celebrations like Nowruz, Persian New Year, predate Islam by millennia. Persian language and poetry remain central to identity. The memory of Cyrus, Darius, and Khosrow coexists with devotion to Ali and Hussein. The unfinished story. Iran's story isn't over. The Islamic Republic faces challenges: a young, educated population demanding reform, economic problems compounded by sanctions, tensions with the West, regional rivalries. But Iranian civilization has faced worse. It survived Alexander, the Mongols, colonialism, and revolution. Whatever happens next, reform, revolution, or continuation, Iran will remain Iran. Its people will remain Iranian, and Persian culture will endure. 5,000 years of continuous civilization is not easily extinguished. Final words. Tonight, we've traveled through 5 millennia, from the first Iranians riding from the steppes, through Cyrus freeing the Jews, through Sassanian glory, through Arab conquest, through Mongol catastrophe, through Safavid renaissance, through Qajar humiliation, through revolution. We've seen empires rise and fall, but Iran persists. The land endures, those same mountains that sheltered Zoroaster, those same deserts crossed by countless armies, those same rivers that watered ancient civilizations. The culture endures, the language of Ferdowsi, the poetry of Hafez and Rumi, the architectural genius, the subtle diplomacy, and the people endure. Iranians who have maintained their identity through everything history could throw at them, who absorbed every conqueror, who kept their language and culture alive through the darkest times, who rebuilt after every catastrophe. Iran's story teaches that culture can be more powerful than military might, that identity can survive political upheaval, and that 5,000 years of civilization create resilience that empires cannot break. From Cyrus to Khomeini, from Persepolis to Tehran, from Zoroastrian fire temples to Shi'a mosques, Iran remains, transformed but recognizable, ancient but alive, proud of ancient kings, and modern of ancient kings, and modern revolution endures. Through all the changes, through all the conquerors, through all the transformations, Iran remains Iran. Good night, and may you dream of ancient Persepolis, of Safavid Isfahan, of poetry and gardens, of a civilization that has seen everything, survived everything, and will continue in ways we cannot predict into a future as long as it's past. The story of Iran is not finished. It never will be. Rest well.